The king himself thought out all the details of the execution ceremony. Vespaluus was to be stripped of his clothes, his hands were to be bound behind him, and he was then to be slung in a recumbent position immediately above 3 of the largest of the royal beehives, so that the least movement of his body would bring him in jarring contact with them. The rest could be safely left to the bees. The death throes, the king computed, might last anything from 15 to 40 minutes, though there was division of opinion and considerable wagering among the other nephews as to whether death might not be almost instantaneous, or, on the other hand, whether it might not be deferred for a couple of hours. Anyway, they all agreed, it was vastly preferable to being thrown down into an evil-smelling bear-pit and being clawed and mauled to death by imperfectly carnivorous animals. It so happened, however, that the keeper of the royal hives had leanings towards Christianity himself, and moreover, like most of the court officials, he was very much attached to Vespaluus. On the eve of the execution, therefore, he busied himself with removing the stings from all the royal bees. It was a long and delicate operation, but he was an expert bee-master, and by working hard nearly all night he succeeded in disarming all, or almost all, of the hive inmates. "I didn't know you could take the sting from a live bee," said the Baroness incredulously. "Every profession has its secrets," replied Clovis. "If it hadn't, it wouldn't be a profession." Well, the moment for the execution arrived. The king and court took their places, and accommodation was found for as many of the populace as wished to witness the unusual spectacle. Fortunately, the royal bee-yard was of considerable dimensions, and was commanded, moreover, by the terraces that ran round the royal gardens. With a little squeezing and the erection of a few platforms, room was found for everybody. Vespaluus was carried into the open space in front of the hives, blushing and slightly embarrassed, but not at all displeased at the attention which was being centred on him. "He seems to have resembled you in more things than in appearance," said the Baroness. "Don't interrupt at a critical point in the story," said Clovis. As soon as he had been carefully adjusted in the prescribed position over the hives, and almost before the gaolers had time to retire to a safe distance, Vespaluus gave a lusty and well-aimed kick, which sent all 3 hives toppling one over another. The next moment he was wrapped from head to foot in bees. Each individual insect nursed the dreadful and humiliating knowledge that in this supreme hour of catastrophe it could not sting, but each felt that it ought to pretend to. Vespaluus squealed and wriggled with laughter, for he was being tickled nearly to death, and now and again he gave a furious kick and used a bad word, as one of the few bees that had escaped disarmament got its protest home. But the spectators saw with amazement that he showed no signs of approaching death agony, and as the bees dropped wearily away in clusters from his body, his flesh was seen to be as white and smooth as before the ordeal, with a shiny glaze from the honey smear of innumerable bee-feet, and here and there a small red spot where one of the rare stings had left its mark. It was obvious that a miracle had been performed in his favour, and one loud murmur, of astonishment or exultation, rose from the onlooking crowd. The king gave orders for Vespaluus to be taken down to await further orders, and stalked silently back to his midday meal, at which he was careful to eat heartily and drink copiously, as though nothing unusual had happened. After dinner he sent for the royal librarian. "What is the meaning of this fiasco?" he demanded. "Your Majesty," said that official, "either there is something radically wrong with the bees—" "There is nothing wrong with my bees," said the king haughtily. "They are the best bees. Or else," said the librarian, "there is something irremediably right about Prince Vespaluus." "If Vespaluus is right, I must be wrong," said the king. The librarian was silent for a moment. Hasty speech has been the downfall of many. Ill-considered silence was the undoing of the luckless court functionary. Forgetting the restraint due to his dignity, and the golden rule which imposes repose of mind and body after a heavy meal, the king rushed upon the keeper of the royal books, and hit him repeatedly and promiscuously over the head with an ivory chessboard, a pewter wine flagon, and a brass candlestick. He knocked him violently and often against an iron torch sconce, and kicked him thrice round the banqueting chamber with rapid, energetic kicks. Finally he dragged him down a long passage by the hair of his head and flung him out of a window into the courtyard below. "Was he much hurt?" asked the Baroness. "More hurt than surprised," said Clovis. "You see, the king was notorious for his violent temper. However, this was the first time he had let himself go so unrestrainedly on the top of a heavy meal. The librarian lingered for many days. In fact, for all I know, he may have ultimately recovered. But Hkrikros died that same evening. Vespaluus had hardly finished getting the honey stains off his body before a hurried deputation came to put the coronation oil on his head, and what with the publicly witnessed miracle and the accession of a Christian sovereign, it was not surprising that there was a general scramble of converts to the new religion. A hastily consecrated bishop was overworked with a rush of baptisms in the hastily improvised cathedral of St. Odilo, and the boy martyr that might have been was transposed in the popular imagination into a royal boy saint, whose fame attracted throngs of curious and devout sightseers to the capital. Vespaluus, who was busily engaged in organizing the games and athletic contests that were to mark the commencement of his reign, had no time to give heed to the religious fervour which was effervescing round his personality. The first indication he had of the existing state of affairs was when the court chamberlain, a recent and very ardent addition to the Christian community, brought for his approval the outlines of a projected ceremonial cutting down of the idolatrous serpent grove. "Your Majesty will be graciously pleased to cut down the first tree with a specially consecrated axe," said the obsequious official. "I'll cut off your head first with any axe that comes handy," said Vespaluus indignantly. "Do you suppose that I'm going to begin my reign by mortally affronting the sacred serpents? It would be most unlucky." "But your Majesty's Christian principles!" exclaimed the bewildered chamberlain. "I never had any," said Vespaluus. "I used to pretend to be a Christian convert, just to annoy Hkrikros. He used to fly into such delicious tempers, and it was rather fun being whipped and scolded and shut up in a tower all for nothing. But as to turning Christian in real earnest, like you people seem to do, I couldn't think of such a thing. And the holy and esteemed serpents have always helped me when I've prayed to them for success in my running and wrestling and hunting, and it was through their distinguished intercession that the bees were not able to hurt me with their stings. It would be black ingratitude to turn against their worship at the very outset of my reign. I hate you for suggesting it." The chamberlain wrung his hands despairingly. "But, your Majesty," he wailed, "the people are reverencing you as a saint, and the nobles are being Christianized in batches, and neighbouring potentates of that faith are sending special envoys to welcome you as a brother. There is some talk of making you the patron saint of beehives, and a certain shade of honey yellow has been christened Vespaluusian gold at the Emperor's court. You can't surely go back on all this?"